Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Fantastic. It is a great afternoon, and it is really a pleasure and an honor to be able to welcome our Dean's Innovative Leader Speaker Series speaker for today. To have Bill Porter with us is indeed a treat. As you all know, Bill is not just at MIT Sloan, but he is back at MIT Sloan. He is one of our own as a Sloan Fellow alumnus. He is the co-founder and current chairman emeritus of E-Trade Financial. Bill has also been a tremendous supporter of MIT Sloan and one of its most thoughtful alumni. And it is really a treat to have him here and to have him with, as I hope you all will recognize, Professor Howard Anderson. And today's Dean's Innovative Leader Speakers Series will be in a great discussion format. And we'll hear from Bill. Howard will have a few questions for Bill. And then, of course, as always, we'll open it up for the thoughts that you all have. My role is to get out of the way as quickly as I can, so let me briefly say, cell phones off, laptops off, and if you would keep in the middle of your minds, next Monday, May 3rd, we will have another Dean's Innovative Leader Series speaker in John Henry from the Boston Red Sox will be joining us. John will also be here in a conversational format with our own Sloan Fellows alum, Phil Cooper, formerly head of Goldman Sachs Private Equity Group. So please keep that in mind for Monday. That will be our last DILS speaker of this semester. Now about today's presentation. E-Trade Financial truly and simply wouldn't exist without the insight, without the intestinal fortitude, the determination, the entrepreneurial spirit of Bill Porter. Bill is really one of those individuals with the vision to see something new and the entrepreneurial spirit to make it happen. By 1982, Bill had already launched Trade Plus, an electronic service bureau for stockbrokers that processed the world's first online trade. In the 1990s, he saw the opportunity to apply this expertise in online exchanges to make online trading directly available to individuals. The result was E-Trade, which really, truly revolutionized the brokerage industry. E-Trade Financial, however, is only one of Bill's leadership accomplishments and legacies in the world. He holds 14 patents for a wide range of electronic devices and processes. In 2000, he launched a new venture, the International Securities Exchange, the nation's first entirely electronic options market. Bill is a really close friend of MIT Sloan, as I mentioned. As I hope you all know, it was the lead gift that he and Joan Porter provided to MIT that enabled the school, the institute, to go forward with our new home, E62, going up next door. Were it not for Bill and Joan, there is no reason to think that that building would be going up next door. And we owe Bill and Joan a great debt of gratitude. If I may just take a second to mention, we are also honored that Joan Porter, who is a leader of organizations and an entrepreneur in her own right, she is a thoughtful and delightful member of our community, and she is also here today. Joan, thank you for being with us as well. I truly look forward to Bill's thoughts. And as I said, we are fortunate to have Howard Anderson here with Bill. You all know that Howard is the holder of the professorship established in Bill Porter's name. He holds the William Porter Distinguished Professorship in Entrepreneurship. He's the founder of the Yankee Group, co-founder of Battery Venture Capital, sits on many high-tech boards, has, by recent tally, taught over 5,000 MIT Sloan students in over a decade, has led in mentorship so many of our graduates to extraordinary success in founding new businesses, and for that mentorship, very recently received the Adolph Manassan Award to recognize his commitment mentoring future entrepreneurs. Bill and Howard have had opportunities to chat with each other before about entrepreneurship, about building small businesses, about running large businesses. We are truly incredibly lucky to have them with us today. Please give an incredible MIT Sloan welcome to both Howard and Bill. Take it away, Howard.
They say the future, which we will live in as entrepreneurs, will be defined by those who create it. And Bill certainly has created a remarkable company, but he also created an industry. I want to go back, Bill, and the time before E-Trade. I want to go back to when you were a teenage kid and you worked as a cowboy. What did you learn from being a cowboy?
Well, it was during World War II, and all the young men had gone off to war. I was living in Denver at the time, 12, 13, 14. And I went to work on a ranch on the western slope of Colorado, cattle ranch. And I worked for an old guy that he was in his 70s who had homesteaded his property. And so I learned from him, and I think that's a formative age, that 12, 13-year-old. Whatever happens to you then kind of sets your, your life path, it seems to me. And I learned from him what I call just do it. Of course, that's a Nike slogan these days. But I learned it from a fellow, this old rancher that we used to call John by God. And the reason is because everything he said was by God this, by God that, no matter what it was. And so, I was maybe 13 years old, I don't remember. And one night he says, hey, take my car and go into town and get some chicken feed. Well, that's, down a dirt road, a windy dirt road on the edge of a cliff and so forth, going down in Glenwood Springs from up in the mountains. And I said, I don't know how to drive. And he said, just do it. So I hopped in his Pierce Arrow car, heavy steering, got it started, and stick shift, of course. And I learned how to drive. Another evening, after stacking hay, we came in with the team of horses that we were using for stack, and this is a team with all the harness and stuff on them. And he says, take the harness off and put them out to pasture. I said, I don't know how to take the harness off. He said, just do it. So I don't know if you've ever had to unharness a team of horses, but so here's all this array of buckles and stuff, and I started and nothing was happening. But then I saw, this one up here on the head, I can get that off. That's easy. So I took the bridles off and zoom out into the field go these two horses, partially harnessed together, galloping along. But I learned from those things that just do it, There's risks involved, but so what? What's the worst that can happen? You might have to go get another job or whatever. So I think I've probably answered that question.
I'm going to stick right on that. So after you learned on that job, you went in the Navy during World War II, and you quit high school to do it. How old were you then?
I was 16. I don't talk about that. Go ahead.
All right. Did you learn anything in the Navy?
Yeah.
All right, I'll get away from that. Now, let's talk a little bit about 1980, 1981. You had been in high tech, had gotten patents, and essentially the age of electronics, and the PC came out. PC came out 1980, 81, 78 was the Apple. When you first found this device, what crossed your mind, and where did you see some of these opportunities?
Okay, well, that leads into the kind of the history of both E-Trade and the ISE. So I'll back up just a little bit from that. And after I was at Sloan and graduated in '67, About 6 months later, I didn't like the job I had, so I went out and started another company. And prior to that, I'd spent like 30 years in electronics and a bunch of patents and so forth and so on, and actually changed several industries already. But I wanted to go commercial, so I started a company by the name of Commercial Electronics, Inc. And I stupidly started 4 different projects because I knew 4 good ideas to apply to commercial. And I'll just mention a couple of them. One was exhaust gas sensors, and another was low light level color television. And things were going swell, building up, had a hell of a time raising capital and so forth, bet my farm, et cetera. And things were going reasonably well until the '74 crash. And at that time, I had a contract with Teleprompter to produce a whole bunch of what I had invented, backpack cameras. First backpack, remote access for nightly news and so forth for TV. Teleprompter had a lot of contracts with a lot of broadcasters. And with the recession, the capital equipment market went psh. And so as a result of that, they canceled the contract. Here I sit with 250 employees and tell them I can't pay them this Friday. Not fun. But anyway, finally sold the company to Warner Communications, and I made $15,000 out of the whole thing and started investing in the stock market. And in the stock market, a little while later, I got really interested. I can beat that market. All I have to do is figure out the trends as to when the Dow is going to go up versus go down. So I went and got all the printouts of the historical, economic indices, unemployment, want ads, and so forth and so on, and started putting them into a brand new machine I just bought, which was one of the very first Apple II computers. It was so new that I didn't even have floppy disks. We just had a tape recorder we had to tape into and extract and so forth from. And so then I discovered that with the Apple, I could get on the Source, the very first online service bureau that had information, and I could get quotes at nighttime. I no longer have to use the newspaper, no longer have to wait for my monthly statement from my broker. Why doesn't somebody do this right? So, okay, let's do it. So I started a company by the name of Trade Plus, along with my legally blind programmer, who was excellent, by the way. He could see, but he was legally blind. And so we started a company. I put in 10,000, he put in 5,000. And pretty soon, we started with a very small discounter in California. By the way, at that time, full-service firms were charging $250 a trade or $500 for a round trip to change from Apple to Google or whatever. And discounters were at about $100 or $200 round trip. And those were pretty big numbers, that chews you up pretty fast if you have a very small amount of money. And so, anyway, set up this service bureau to supply, to hook brokers with their customers, where we would, the customer would think they were talking to that broker, really talking to us until he placed an order, and it was kicked out to the broker and back again. And so I was pretty successful, picked up Fidelity, later Schwab. Both of them wanted to buy us. I said no. Both of them took it in-house. Finally picked up Quick and Riley and continued on. And then in 1989, they said, we're going to leave you. And I said, okay, fine, I'll go into competition with you. And I managed to scrape together $100,000. And I launched ourselves as a broker-dealer by the name of E-Trade. And I did all the advertising and so forth, and some clever ads. I ran one ad, full page, $100,000 it cost me after I made enough profit to be able to do it, in the Wall Street Journal nationally, saying, E-Trade, boot your broker. Well, the NASD came down on me for that, of course. But E-Trade has had clever advertising ever since, including the baby ad you see today. It's just kind of been the nature of the company. I've had nothing to do with that, by the way, but I think they're great. I do have something to do with babies, but that's different.
So, all right, so here comes the PC, the Apple, and here comes Billy Von Meister, who started the Source at $1.75 an hour,
That's right.
giving you access. Von Meister also started something that was a music download that predated Napster. He also started the first electronic mail company. So you have two parts of the equation, and you were essentially in the app business, taking these two parts and coming up with an innovative new idea.
That's right, and everybody thought I was nuts. And I had a hell of a time raising money, but somehow managed to put it all together. But we struggled for 10 years, about a year and a half of which I never got paid, mortgaged the house again, et cetera, et cetera.
You're not the biggest fan of the venture capital industry.
That's 100% correct.
Can you, and I know that the people from TA are some of the people that, can you tell us why your feelings about the venture industry are what they are?
Well, all too often, I basically have lived most of my more adult life in Silicon Valley. And I've seen lots and lots of companies start up out there, many of which take on VC money. And A, they get too much money and then buy yachts and so forth instead of doing their job, and that's bad. Or B, worse yet, within 2 years they get into trouble, which almost every venture does. And then you got this young, really bright, and I'll blame it on Harvard MBA, who sits on the board, not MIT, you wouldn't do this, but anyway, who sits on the board and has the power because he's got the bucks to give the company more money. And so he takes over control of the company, and he doesn't know squat about the business, really. And the company goes right down the tubes. And that happens as often as not. And you have a dichotomy of interests, which is bad. It's like getting married to somebody that likes to go to the woods and you want to go to the opera. It's a case where it's a case where the entrepreneur wants to build a business. He or she is madly in love with this great concept, and the venture capital wants to make a quick buck. And that's a dichotomy that, and it's a partnership, but who has control is the guy with the bucks. And that's not a good recipe. That's the reason
I understand and completely agree. One of my friends says to his young partners in the venture business, be careful what advice you give because they just may take it, and that would be a terrible thing. I'm going to talk a little bit about leadership. Who are some of the things that you looked at as you came up, and what kind of insight do you have about where leadership and technology coalesce?
Well, up until I was invited to speak at this event, which the name of it is what? Leadership?
Leadership, yeah.
Yeah, leadership. I really had never thought much about leadership because it really never affected me much. It just wasn't part. I've thought a lot about promoting people and so forth and what their skill set was, and their ambition and so forth and so on, and integrity, all the great qualities that you want to see in people. But I never really thought much in terms of leadership until the last 3 or 4 days. And after starting to think about it, I got really confused. There's so many facets to this thing. Well, you could say almost anything because, you can't go wrong talking about leadership. There's so much to it. But then it finally kind of formed up for me essentially an array that kind of makes sense to me. And I'd kind of like to maybe run it by you. And it may be trivial, it's probably already been done in spades, but if I may, I need a volunteer of some young person, come on up here, to write for me because I'm kind of shaky. When you get to be 81, your body doesn't work quite the way it did. If you start at that point right about there, and go straight out, all the way, and then straight up.
All the way?
Yeah, all the way, X, Y, X, axis. Okay, now let's start right down here. And I'll ask a question. What is, in your opinion, name for me, the easiest type of organization to lead?
Sole proprietorship.
The sole proprietorship. No. Good idea. That's not an organization. It doesn't qualify.
Pick on anyone, whether their hands are up or not.
You got it, military. That's the easiest one to lead. So if you just write the word military right there. Okay, now what's the next easiest one to lead? Huh? No, school? No, sports. Try sports. Team activity. Think of, I'm not talking about managing the team, I'm talking about within the team. The quarterback is the leader, and he has an easy job in some sense, so long as he doesn't blow it, which he oftentimes does. Because the reason is because, boy, that team wants to win. Everybody's enthusiastic on that team. You know how they all jump up in the air and stuff to win. And so that's an easy one. So team is the next level there. And what do you think the next one might be? Well, to me, it's a startup, an entrepreneurial startup. And the reason I say that, and that's where I have spent most of my life, is in startups. And so long as you have the ability to clearly define where you want to go, what your new product is, its market situation, how you can make a profit, how you're going to finance it, you're very clear. You can coalesce not only employees, but your customers, your investors, and so forth. But once you have that put together, man, that team is willing to work day and night to meet the deadline of the National Association of Broadcasters show that comes on March the 31st in Phoenix. And so you do that. So startups is easy to manage, and therefore I've never thought about leadership much. Now, what do you think the next one is pretty easy at, or the next most difficult? Well, I think it's established businesses. So established businesses, and there I would include, like Macy's or U.S. Steel or whatever. And you don't have to have a great deal of management leadership ability because you have the time clock and you have the new, for the shoe salesman guy the leader of the shoes at Nordstrom, you don't have to incentivize that guy because he wants to make money, and the way he does it by selling the next pair of shoes. But you do kind of have to, lead them a bit, but it still isn't much of a challenge. Now, the next most difficult is what I would call clubs. And by clubs, what I mean is an affiliation of people to do something, like, for example, a medical clinic or a hospital where you have a bunch of doctors and so forth, each with their divergent idea, or, for example, the dean of a school, like the fellow sitting right over here, where he has all of these professors, each of whom is a prima donna, I'm certain, and he has to lead them. Now, that's not an easy thing to do. That takes real talent. Okay. And the next level up, that's even more difficult, is local government. And in local government, you know, you have all these political factions. You have the agenda of the local police force versus the teachers union and so forth. You have to pull all those people together. And that takes a hell of a talented person to do a good job of that. That takes real leadership. And finally, at the very top level of my list here is what I would call empires, which is any country, any sovereign country, like the United States or Russia, I don't care which one you want to pick. And to
Correctly.
Yeah, you're doing
English is
fine.
not my-
Yeah.
empire, you got it. Okay, and so each one of those, you know, to really be a master of running that kind of an organization is probably, in my book, the most difficult job of leadership as anything else. But now let's look at the types of leaders. These are the jobs, these are the things that need to be led, the entities. I hope this is not trivial.
No, no, keep going.
Oh, okay.
And first of all, I want to thank you for not using PowerPoint.
What's your name?
Leron.
I'm Legion Leroy.
Leroy, is it?
Leron.
Leron. In the MBE?
No, actually, I'm a postdoc at the OR Center.
In what?
Operations Research.
OR. Oh, that's scary. So now let's look at the types of people who are leaders going on the x-axis out here. And starting over here in this corner, we'll have something I'll call a dull tool. So if you write that down there, dull tool.
D-U-L-L.
And a dull tool is anybody that, you know, they don't really care about their job, or they're lazy, or maybe they just aren't very bright, and really just not very capable. And, you know, they can certainly handle the military, can't they? Huh? I mean, when the lieutenant says, "Sergeant, take that hill with your men," the sergeant says, "Yes, sir," and it happens, even though he may have an IQ of only 60 or something.
Would this be the officer or the sergeant?
Either one. Okay. And the next one is probably the logical, and that really tends to be me. You know, I don't have a lot of charisma. I'm not a great speaker. I just, you know, kind of, when I get involved with something, boy, I really focus in on it, figure it from every which angle, and do all my homework, and then I present it, and I can convince investors to invest in this thing, people to go to work and get enthusiastic and so forth. And that's kind of a logical leader. And the next one, you got logic? Oh, great. The next one is inspirational. That would be kind of like your
We're going to need a lot of space here, so. Yeah, you need more space, but just,
INSP, period.
your inspiration. This would be your preachers and other people that can bring together some real interests from a group in leading better lives and so forth. And the next one is really, after that, is hierarchical. And that was the mode of leadership that I was brought up. The boss is the boss, and under him is 6 people who, right on down the chain, no more than 6 layers in a GE, et cetera, et cetera. But it was all hierarchical. He was the boss, here's what you do. And so on down the chain. But that has evolved over time to come to something that I don't understand very well. But my wife, Joan, loves to talk about it all the time, and that's collaboration. And I don't know how you whip a bunch of people into doing stuff. I've had trouble with that all my life. And then you get it. The next one, and it's the next to last, is really what I would call the demanding or bossy guy. I remember when we were on our Sloan program, we were on tour in New York City, and I met with Roger Blau. And he was the head of U.S. Steel, and he was a tough guy. He's the same guy that went up against, I guess it was Kennedy, I can't remember. Was it Kennedy? Yeah. On the union raising prices and so forth and so on, steel prices. He was a really tough guy, a real demanding bully guy. And I asked him, well, why haven't you converted your steel mills? Because I know in Mexico they have better steel mills, and I forgot, flow process or something, I can't remember now. And he came back at me. He didn't answer the question. He says, who do you work for? I said, well, I work for Textron. He says, well, you make helicopters, don't you? I said, yeah, our company makes helicopters. That was the Huey one that was used in Vietnam. And he said, well, they crash, don't they? I mean, did he answer about his steel? Hell no. He was a bully. He put me right down. And I didn't say anything to him, but I thought, that's a terrible way to manage. But he was a very powerful leader. And the next one is dictator. Now let's put some X's up here. And let me take dictator on the x-axis and empire on the y-axis and put a check mark or a cross or something. And guess who that, well, I'll tell you, one of the greatest leaders of all time, and you may not like what he did, I'm sure you don't, Adolf Hitler. Tremendous leader. He got all of Germany, what was it, 12, about probably 20 million at that point, people saying, Heil Hitler, Tremendous leader. And likewise, Stalin, tremendous leader. And he annihilated, 6,000 or whatever it was, army and business leaders within Russia to maintain control. But by God, he was the head of Russia for, 30 years or whatever it was. He ran it without question. So is dictatorship confined only to empires? No. I'll give you a good example of where it's very effective in business today. There's a fellow by the name of Steve Jobs. And he's a very effective, very effective leader. And he is, where the hell is he? He's in really an established business now. But I'm a very good friend for 35 years with a fellow who sat next to Wozniak, who also started Apple, and where they were programming the first, and he really hates Jobs, because Jobs is a dictator, a brilliant, effective, innovative dictator, but he is a dictator. And he's probably softened up later in life, but he is, definitely of the type over there. So you can be almost any one of these and achieve to some degree in each of these, except for possibly the military. Well, the military, anybody can achieve in. And certainly it takes brilliance. And, Bull Halsey was certainly a sort of a dictator guy, etc. So you can be almost...
Collaboration, not so much.
Pardon?
The collaboration, maybe not so much.
Well, collaboration, there's a perfect example in my mind of that, and that's Obama. He really tries to collaborate. Of course, he's got some people out there or some other party, whatever it is, that really don't want to collaborate very much. But, I think he's doing personal opinion, I think he's doing the right thing around the world, trying to work with other countries and so forth, instead of we're the U.S., we're the greatest ever kind of thing. That's just a personal opinion.
Bill, one of the issues that sometimes comes up in companies is an East Coast versus West Coast thing. On the East Coast, we always use General Electric as a well-run company, but on the West Coast, it's Hewlett-Packard.
Yeah.
So, and not just Hewlett and Packard, but there are alumni that spun out. Where would you put essentially that kind of, would that be more collaboration here as you look at them and those people that came out of that technology group?
Well, I think HP would fit into this. They were definitely a startup out there. I remember buying their very first audio oscillator. But they have ultimately evolved into the best instrument company and then the best printer and PC company, or at least one of the leaders. And they're a very well established and very well managed company.
Let's go fast forward. Talk to us a little bit about Google.
Well, Google is very fortunate. First of all, they come from the new age, so they really want to, let me just say, go green, and in a good way, and collaboration, all those good new things and so forth. And fortunately, they've been so extremely successful in making money, they can do whatever they want. And so they have very high moral standards in terms of what they do. They're doing unbelievable things like copying literature all around the world to get everything online that they can. These things are just mind-boggling to me, but they're extremely wealthy and can do these things. We've had other companies that have come out. Apple was that way in its early age, although it was still more of a hierarchical situation and not nearly as green in those days. But you know, they used to have free coffee and probably still do, et cetera, for their employees.
When you look at, let's go back to Microsoft for a moment, which came out with one great product, but seems not to be able to replicate that lately. Is there a certain life cycle to some of these management groups? And do you see essentially this being a problem for even large, wealthy companies?
Well, I think there's a life cycle to almost every company. If you go back and look at the Dow between the year 1900 and the year 2000, you know, there's only one remaining company, and that's General Electric. All the rest of them have gone by the wayside. So there's a natural evolution with companies going by the wayside over time, and new ones sprouting up like Google and becoming dominant organizations, and that too will no doubt, and certainly Microsoft will no doubt. Microsoft to me has been a disappointment. Bill Gates has been a genius in terms of organizing around his operating system and I don't want to, I'll use the word manipulate, I don't quite mean that, but extending the capabilities and extent of his operating system to get more business. And most recently just released, what was it, Series 7 or whatever it's called, which has produced good profits. But you know what? He's bagged a ton of money and he hasn't innovated really anything except the operating system. You know, he's got MSNBC, he could have done the iPhone, he could have done the Google thing. And he's always been in the catch-up mode. Even today, his operating system, which has Windows, they're trying to catch up with Steve Jobs with his Apple. You know, Apple is always one step ahead of him. And it's just remarkable to me that out of this organization, somehow they really haven't been able, in my opinion, to innovate much.
Okay. What I'd like to do now is just think for a minute, a question you would like to ask Bill, either about companies or leadership or entrepreneurship. Just think for a minute and then find your way over to one of these microphones, and we're going to have a much more interactive session. And I think I have, let me see a couple of hands, a question you'd like to ask. And thank you. Questions. You're not getting out of here until I get at least 5 questions. Well, in that case, I have a few, till you can think of some. Go ahead, we got one over here.
Hang on a second, here we go.
Do you see organizations trending from
along the x-axis you have a list of categories there. Do you see organizations trending from one direction to another, meaning fewer hierarchical and more collaborative, or perhaps fewer logical and more inspirational organizations out there?
Well, I think the trend is very much away from hierarchical, although it certainly still exists very strongly in corporations today and in government. But more and more, the teams are brought together, and more, the supervisor or manager, whatever it may be, will pull together his team and sit and discuss it for 2 or 3 hours about this, or how can we change it and improve it and so forth. And that becomes more collaborative, and finally they'll make the decision and go with it. It used to be that the manager would just say, okay, I think the best is to go that direction to do that. Whereas now, just working on his or her intuition, but now it's really much more of a team effort, which incidentally, the Japanese were doing, as late, I guess really all through their hierarchy, all through their history. When they, one of the big advantages that they've had in the automotive industry in the, 20 years, 30 years ago when they started to penetrate this country, they actually get together as group, and exercise together and so forth, and then the people are assembling, putting the fenders on the cars or whatever their job is. They get together as a team and they discuss it, and why did we just move the crane over that way a little bit? We can cut down on the, et cetera, et cetera. And so they've really built a better product through collaboration, whereas in Detroit, the guy that was head of fender assembly was, here's how it's done. Don't mess around, just put it on, put your screw right there. So the tendency is definitely towards more, at least from what I've seen, toward more collaboration.
Bill, in 1992, you were the fastest growing company in Silicon Valley. How did you hire? How did you promote? How did you know who to promote? Because you could not have done it unless you had a team that was, going to outperform your competition.
92, yeah, well, we were growing really fast in those days. We were growing 25% a month. And that is a real problem. It's great to have success, but my God, let's take, for example, I had customer service people answering phones, right? And so I have 50 people in there this month. That means I have to have like 62 or whatever it is next month. That means I have to hire about 15 for that month because a few of them will fall by the wayside, which means I have to interview probably 20, not me personally, but it has to be done. And by the way, we've got to give them desks, we have to give them telephones, we got to get new real estate, et cetera, et cetera. This is, and every month after month. And I didn't like it. Now, how did I hire? First thing I did when I got, I don't like to sit in meetings with attorneys, real estate, telephone, recruiting, pep talks to the troops and all that stuff. That part's okay, but I just didn't like it. So I went and hired a top-notch guy, Christos Kotsakos, who really made the company happen. And that gave me the opportunity to look down underneath to see what our problems were, and that's when I got into options, which has resulted in me founding what is now the largest options exchange in the world.
One led to another.
That's right.
Look forward for me a few years. What is this world going to look like in, let's say, 4 or 5 years, with everyone pretty much in the world having a cell phone and a smart cell phone, which is a computer where information, flies at enormous speed, where, our institutions are really quite different. Can you look ahead 3 years for us?
Boy, that's really hard to do. Things have moved so fast. I've given 2 or 3 commencement speeches, and I talk about how change is accelerating. And I point out the change between 1900 and the year 2000 and how much it accelerates. And every innovative thing gets adopted even faster. I mean, for example, bank terminals, it took them like, I've forgotten, 10 years before they penetrated 50% of the market or something like that. The internet has absolutely exploded in 10 years. Where is things going to be in 5 years? No question we'll have, I'll call it iPads that does everything. That everything that, right now you need a laptop, you need an iPhone, and you need but the iPad probably will replace that, and it'll be Wi-Fi every place. And with Google putting everything up online around the world, you'll be able to find out anything you want to know, which you can do almost already with the devices we have. But where does it go from there? I don't know. I will say one thing, however, that I've been very lucky in my lifetime. When I got out of the Navy at the end of World War II, went back to a small school in Colorado University, and I was fortunate that the U.S. Navy had given us a bunch of spare equipment. And I tried to figure out how to run it and so forth. And I got hooked on electronics. So I've been in electronics pretty much all my life, including the exchange and all that stuff, because I'm really just an electronicer. And so I caught the wave, and the wave is just like that. I've been very lucky. And, I think the things you folks are learning are certainly going to explode in that fashion faster yet. As I've told in these commencement speeches, whatever has happened in the last century happened in a century, it's going to happen in your lifetime in 50 years. And I really believe that. It is exploding so fast. And what is the very best field to get into? Well, probably, I don't think, probably hardly anyone in here is into that, but life sciences. That area, to me, we think, oh, wow, we got the DNA and we got, gene for how to make a little better tomatoes or whatever, et cetera, et cetera. But that field of study and application hasn't even started. And I think over the next 50 years is going to be the biggest one. So if you're not in life sciences, better get in it quick. Not really. There's plenty
Actually,
of
you
other
will
things.
find, I'll ask the question, how many see themselves in a life sciences business within the next 5 years? So quite a few.
Yeah.
In fact, I ask a number of the CEOs we bring in, where would you go if you were 27 years old? And they pretty much confirm what you say. I would, go into things like life sciences where there's a great deal of unknown, but it is dawn.
Well, since I think that, they must be right.
Absolutely. Questions? Go ahead. Let me pass over the microphone, if we could.
So I think your sentiment about VCs is probably shared by a lot of people. What do you think is the best alternative for funding a new company that might be highly capital intensive?
Okay, there's the very best is your own money, because you got complete control of that. Maybe not much, but at least you have it. Next is probably your family and friends. But then there's also some hidden things that you can dig into. One of them is your customers. Oftentimes if you're coming out with a new widget and you go to the organization that's going to buy that widget and you say, hey, look, I can build this thing, it's going to be, I'll give you rights on it on the front end, but I need some money. And they'll fund you, they'll want their money back, they want to make money, et cetera, but they'll also support you, so that's the best kind of money. Banks, forget it. They won't, until you're profitable and don't need any money, they won't give you any money. VCs is kind of the last resort, but if you're going in for
startup that requires a ton of money, that's really the only place you can get it. I don't know if I...
Bill, last question. You have been very generous with MIT and our efforts in entrepreneurship. Why?
Well, when E-Trade went public, Joan and I became pretty wealthy. And so, let's give back something to society. And we thought about the various charities we might contribute to, Red Cross, I don't know, half a dozen other things. But then MIT popped up, and I had talked, I think it was with Glenn Urban, and he was telling me that his problem, he was then the dean of the school here, and he was telling me that all of how the campus, or whatever you want to call it, of the Sloan School was scattered all through buildings, classrooms, professors, and so forth, all over the place. And he'd really like to see a new building. He had told me that sometime earlier. So I thought, hey, that could be interesting. The thing that really motivated me along those lines was that, MIT is really the fountainhead, if I can call it that, of science and engineering in this country. I don't think there's any equal to it. Many good schools, don't get me wrong, but MIT is kind of the peak institution. But in my experience in industry, very few engineers and scientists really appreciate the problems of bringing their products to market. Because it isn't just a neat new widget that is great and innovative and all that stuff, but now you gotta get it into the marketplace for people to use. And that requires marketing, financing, production, organization, etc. And that's the business school. So if the business school can even compound or increase its effectiveness with MIT and can then leverage the science and engineering side of the institute, which is the major part of the institute, it would be a great thing to do. So Les, Joan, you and I give them some money to start a building. And there's that someplace over here. I don't know which way it is. Someplace out there that you'll all be in, I guess, next year. So,
Bill, we thank you.